The girl in the hay barn. The first thing anyone noticed about Red Creek was the silence, not the peaceful kind, the kind that settled over a dying town like dust over a grave. Late summer, 1887. The wells were shrinking, the grass had turned the color of old bones. Wind carried dry sand through empty streets where merchants once argued over cattle prices and prospectors dreamed of striking silver. Even the church bell sounded weaker than it had the year before. And beyond the town, beneath an endless sky burned pale by drought, stood Mercer Ranch. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel and tap the bell icon. Stories like this deserve to be remembered. The ranch belonged to Elias Mercer. Most people in Red Creek respected him. Some feared him. None truly knew him. At 39 years old, Elias carried himself like a man older than his years. His broad shoulders still spoke of strength, but grief had carved deep lines into his face. He rarely visited town except for supplies. He rarely smiled, and after sunset, he almost never spoke. People said sorrow had settled inside him and refused to leave. On that particular evening, the sky glowed copper beneath gathering clouds as Elias rode the northern fence line. His horse moved slowly. There wasn't much reason to hurry anymore. The drought had taken half his herd. The land itself seemed exhausted. As he approached one of the abandoned hay barns near the edge of the property, something caught his attention. A movement, small, quick, gone. Elias narrowed his eyes. The barn hadn't been used in years. Nobody should have been there. His hand drifted toward the revolver at his side. The wind whispered through dry grass. Silence returned. Then came the faint sound of breathing. He dismounted, slowly, carefully. The old barn door creaked as he pushed it open. Inside, darkness pooled between stalks of aging hay. For several moments he saw nothing. Then he heard it, a sharp intake of breath. Someone was hiding. "Come out," Elias said calmly. No response. "I ain't looking for trouble." Still nothing. The fading sunlight slipped through cracks in the wooden walls, revealing a figure crouched behind a stack of hay bales. A young woman, dirty, exhausted, terrified. Yet even in that moment, her eyes burned with defiance. She couldn't have been older than 25. Her dark hair hung loose around her face. Dust covered her clothes. Small cuts marked her hands and forearms. She looked like someone who had traveled hard and slept little. But what struck Elias most wasn't her condition. It was the revolver pointed directly at his chest. The woman held it with steady hands. "Don't come closer," she warned. Her voice was rough from thirst. Elias studied her, the weapon, the fear, the determination. Most frightened people shook. She didn't. "You're on my land," he replied quietly. She swallowed. "Then maybe you should have picked a smaller piece of it." For the first time in months, something almost resembling amusement crossed Elias's face. Almost. The woman didn't lower the gun. Neither did he reach for his own. The silence stretched between them. Finally, Elias noticed something. Her hands were steady. Her body wasn't. She was barely remaining conscious. The realization softened something inside him. "When did you last eat?" he asked. The question seemed to surprise her. She hesitated, then looked away. That was answer enough. Outside, thunder rumbled somewhere beyond distant hills. The woman swayed slightly. Her revolver dipped, only for a moment, but Elias saw it. He also saw pride fighting desperately against weakness. Without speaking, he removed a canteen from his saddle and set it several feet away from her. Then he stepped back, far enough to show he meant no harm. The woman stared suspiciously. Minutes passed. Eventually, she lowered the revolver, not because she trusted him, because she was losing the battle against exhaustion. She grabbed the canteen, drank, and nearly cried. Water, simple water, yet it felt like life itself. "My name is Elias Mercer," he said. She wiped her mouth. Silence. "What shall I call you?" The woman looked toward the open doorway, toward freedom, toward escape, toward dangers she clearly feared even more than a stranger. Finally, she answered, "Rosa." Nothing more, just Rosa. Elias understood. People carrying secrets often traveled with only half their names. That night, a storm rolled across the frontier. Lightning flashed above distant mountains. Rain struck the ranch house roof. For the first time in weeks. Inside, Rosa sat near the kitchen stove, while Elias prepared food. The smell alone made her stomach ache. Neither spoke much. Both carried wounds invisible to the eye. At one point, Rosa noticed a faded family photograph sitting on a nearby shelf. A woman, a young girl, and a younger version of Elias. The photograph stood alone, like a memorial. She didn't ask questions. The sadness surrounding it was obvious enough. By morning, word had already begun spreading through Red Creek. A mysterious woman had appeared at Mercer Ranch. Speculation grew quickly. Some believed she was a criminal. Others believed she was fleeing one. Neither theory was entirely wrong. Meanwhile, Rosa spent the next few days recovering. She helped with chores when she could, watched, listened, learned, and gradually noticed something strange. Every morning, every afternoon, every evening, Elias disappeared, exactly 3 times each day. Always alone, always following the same route beyond the western hills. No explanation, no discussion, no witnesses. The routine never changed, not once. The mystery began to gnaw at her. A man as guarded as Elias Mercer did not repeat a ritual like that without reason, and whatever waited beyond those hills seemed connected to the sadness she had glimpsed in his eyes. On the 5th evening, Rosa stood outside the ranch house watching the sun sink behind distant mountains. Golden light stretched across the dry plains. Far away, she could see Elias riding back from another unexplained journey. The wind lifted strands of her hair. Questions filled her mind. Questions about the rancher. Questions about herself. Questions about the men who were still searching for her somewhere beyond the horizon. She knew she couldn't stay forever, but for now, leaving felt impossible. For the first time in months, she was safe, and for the first time in years, she was curious about someone other than herself. As darkness settled across Mercer Ranch, Rosa Alvarez made a quiet decision. She would stay, at least a little longer, long enough to discover why Elias Mercer vanished 3 times a day, long enough to uncover the secret hidden beyond the western hills, long enough to learn whether some wounds could truly heal, or whether certain ghosts follow a person forever.
3 visits a day. The trail of fresh hoofprints cut through the morning dust like a secret someone had forgotten to hide. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel and tap the bell icon. Stories like this deserve to be remembered. The sun had barely risen over the frontier when Rosa Alvarez stood beside the corral fence, watching Elias Mercer saddle his horse. The air smelled of dry earth and leather. Golden light spilled across the ranch. Everything seemed peaceful, yet something about Elias always felt distant, as though part of him lived somewhere nobody else could reach. Over the past several weeks, Rosa had slowly become part of life on Mercer Ranch. At first, the ranch hands had treated her with suspicion. Frontier people learned caution the hard way. Strangers often brought trouble. But Rosa proved useful, more than useful. One morning, she helped calm a frightened horse nobody else could handle. Another day, she repaired a damaged ledger after noticing accounting mistakes that had gone unnoticed for months. She could ride, she could shoot, she could read and write better than most men in the county. The ranch hands stopped seeing her as a burden. They began seeing her as one of their own. Even old Samuel Briggs, a grizzled former cavalry scout who trusted almost nobody, eventually nodded his approval. "That girl's tougher than half the men I've served beside," he muttered one afternoon. The words spread quickly. Respect followed. But while Rosa earned trust, one mystery continued to occupy her thoughts. Elias's disappearances, 3 times every day, without fail. Morning, noon, sunset. Always alone. Always returning with the same distant expression, as though he had traveled somewhere beyond memory itself. The mystery refused to leave her mind, and one morning, curiosity finally overcame caution. When Elias rode west after sunrise, Rosa quietly saddled a horse of her own. She waited several minutes, then followed. The trail stretched through rolling hills covered in brittle grass. Dust rose beneath the hooves. A warm wind swept across the open country. Far in the distance, mountains shimmered beneath the heat. Rosa kept her distance, close enough to follow, far enough to remain unseen. The journey lasted nearly an hour. Eventually, Elias left the main trail and entered a narrow valley hidden between rocky ridges. The place seemed forgotten by the world. Cottonwood trees grew beside a small creek that somehow survived the drought. Birdsong echoed softly through the silence. Then Rosa saw it, a cemetery, tiny, isolated. No church, no town, just a handful of weathered graves beneath the trees. She guided her horse behind a cluster of rocks and watched. Elias dismounted slowly. The movement carried the weight of ritual. He removed 2 small bouquets of wildflowers from his saddlebag, flowers he must have gathered before sunrise. Carefully, patiently, he approached 2 graves, knelt, and placed the flowers there. For several minutes he said nothing. The valley remained silent except for the wind moving through the trees. Then he lowered his head, not in defeat, in remembrance. Rosa's chest tightened. Even from a distance, she could feel the grief surrounding him, the kind that never truly healed, only learned how to survive. When Elias finally rode away, Rosa waited until he disappeared beyond the hills. Then she approached the graves, slowly, respectfully. The names were carved into simple stone markers: Sarah Mercer, beloved wife; Emily Mercer, beloved daughter. Rosa stood motionless. The realization struck her harder than she expected. Everything suddenly made sense. The silence, the loneliness, the sadness in his eyes. The photograph in the ranch house. The man who visited these graves 3 times a day was not haunted by mystery. He was haunted by love. She stared at the weathered stones. The dates revealed another tragedy. Sarah and Emily had died on the same day, years earlier, together. The thought settled heavily inside her. For a long time, Rosa said nothing. She simply stood under the cottonwoods listening to the creek flow over smooth stones. Then she quietly returned to the ranch. But her curiosity had only deepened, because grief explained part of Elias, not all of him. Over the next several days, she continued observing, without following too closely, without invading his privacy, and gradually she discovered the pattern. Every morning he brought flowers. At noon he knelt in prayer. At sunset he sat beside the graves and spoke aloud, as though his wife and daughter still listened, as though conversation itself
them alive. One evening, Rosa happened to ride near the valley while gathering stray cattle. The sun was descending behind distant mountains. Orange light painted the landscape. She stopped when she heard a voice. Elias's voice. Soft, gentle, different from the man everyone else knew. Emily would have liked this horse, he said quietly. The words carried across the valley. Stubborn as a mule. A faint smile touched his face. For a moment, he looked less like a lonely rancher and more like a father remembering his child. Then the smile disappeared, and the sadness returned. Rosa turned away before he could see her. The moment felt too personal, too sacred. That night, she sat alone on the porch of the ranch house. Moonlight silvered the prairie. Coyotes howled somewhere beyond the hills. She thought about loss, about family, about the people she had buried, about the father she could never bring back. For the first time, she understood that grief wore many faces. Some screamed, others remained silent. Elias carried his like a second shadow. Days passed. Autumn crept slowly across the frontier. Cooler winds arrived from the mountains. The ranch prepared for winter. And something subtle began changing between Rosa and Elias. Not romance. Not yet. Something quieter. A growing understanding. Sometimes their eyes met across a field. Sometimes a conversation lingered longer than necessary. Sometimes silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. Both noticed. Neither acknowledged it. The frontier had taught them caution. Trust came slowly. Affection came slower still. Yet something was undeniably growing. Then danger arrived. It entered Red Creek just before sunset, riding a black horse coated in trail dust. The rider wore a long coat despite the heat. A rifle rested across his saddle. A revolver hung low on his hip. His face carried the hard expression of a man accustomed to violence. Nobody in town recognized him, but everyone recognized what he was: a bounty hunter. The stranger stopped outside the saloon. Several townspeople watched from boardwalks and storefronts. The newcomer removed a folded paper from his coat. On it was a sketch. A woman's face, dark hair, sharp eyes, determined expression. Rosa Alvarez. The bounty hunter stepped toward the sheriff's office. His boots echoed against the wooden boards. A cold wind swept through town. Dust curled across the street. And somewhere far away on Mercer Ranch, Rosa stood beside a fence watching the sunset, completely unaware that her past had finally caught up with her. The sky burned red above the horizon, the same color as old wounds, the same color as approaching trouble. And in a hidden valley beneath whispering cottonwoods, Elias Mercer sat beside 2 graves, speaking softly to the people he loved most, unaware that another storm was already riding toward them. That was my story. If it reached you, tell me what you felt. Don't let silence bury us again. Drop your thoughts in the comments and tell me where in the world you're listening from. Whispers of the Heart. Autumn arrived on the frontier like a quiet confession. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel and tap the bell icon. Stories like this deserve to be remembered. The first cold winds swept down from the distant mountains, carrying the scent of pine and approaching winter. The endless grasslands surrounding Mercer Ranch shifted from dusty gold to deeper shades of amber and bronze.
Mornings arrived wrapped in pale fog. Evenings stretched longer beneath skies painted with fire and violet clouds. And somewhere between those mornings and evenings, something neither Elias Mercer nor Rosa Alvarez had expected began taking root. It did not happen all at once. It happened in moments, small moments, dangerous moments, the kind that changed lives without announcing themselves. One afternoon, Rosa spent hours helping repair a broken fence line near the northern pasture. The work was exhausting. Splinters tore into her palms, sweat dampened her collar despite the cool weather. When the final post was secured, she stepped back to admire the work. Elias stood nearby. Neither spoke. The wind moved softly through the grass around them. Then he handed her a canteen. A simple gesture, yet somehow it felt more intimate than words. Their fingers brushed briefly. The contact lasted only a second. Both noticed. Neither mentioned it. As the weeks passed, they found themselves spending more time together. Sometimes necessity provided the excuse. Sometimes neither bothered searching for one. Long cattle drives across empty valleys, repairs around the ranch, supply runs into town, quiet evenings near campfires. Every shared experience added another thread to the growing bond between them. One evening, after returning from a difficult day gathering stray cattle near the foothills, they sat beside a fire overlooking the river. The sky was clear. Stars filled the darkness. The crackling flames illuminated their faces. For a long time, neither spoke. The silence felt comfortable. Then Rosa finally broke it. "My father taught me how to ride." Elias looked toward her. She rarely spoke about her past. The seriousness in her voice made him listen carefully. "He used to say a horse can tell what kind of person you are before people can." A faint smile touched her lips, then faded. The firelight reflected in her eyes. "My father was Mexican." Elias remained silent, allowing her to continue. Rosa stared into the flames. "They killed him when I was 16. The words settled heavily between them. The wind seemed to pause. Even the river sounded quieter. "There was a land dispute," she continued. "A wealthy rancher wanted our property." Her voice remained calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that only came after years of carrying pain. "My father refused to sell." She swallowed. "So they accused him of crimes he never committed." The fire crackled. A coyote howled somewhere in the distance. Rosa lowered her gaze. There wasn't a trial. Elias already knew what came next. Frontier history contained too many stories like this one. Stories nobody wanted to remember. They hanged him from a cottonwood tree. The words struck harder than any shout. For several seconds, neither moved. Neither spoke. Rosa stared into the flames. Not crying, not trembling, simply remembering. After that, she said quietly, "I learned not to trust anyone." The confession hung in the cold night air. Elias looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time he understood that beneath her strength existed scars as deep as his own. Different scars, but equally painful. "You survived," he finally said. Rosa laughed softly, not because it was funny, because survival sometimes felt like the cruelest victory. "That's what people always say." Elias nodded. He understood. Sometimes surviving meant carrying memories nobody else could see. The conversation ended there. Neither needed more words. The truth had already been spoken. Over the following days, an unspoken understanding developed between them. They began recognizing pain in one another, not as weakness, as evidence. Evidence of battles fought and endured. Yet while their connection deepened, the world around them became less forgiving. Frontier towns survived on stories, and stories spread quickly, especially in places where entertainment was scarce. Soon people throughout Red Creek began whispering. Some spoke kindly, others did not. Inside the saloon, old ranchers exchanged knowing looks. Store owners noticed how often Rosa accompanied Elias into town. Church members quietly discussed the matter after Sunday services. The rumors grew larger with every retelling. One afternoon, while purchasing supplies, Rosa overheard two women speaking.
Near the general store, they made little effort to lower their voices. "Mercer's forgotten his wife awfully fast. He visits those graves every day. Then maybe he should remember where his loyalty belongs." The words stung, not because they were true, because they revealed how cruel people could be. Later that same week, Elias faced criticism of his own. Several local ranchers confronted him outside the livestock auction yard. The conversation remained civil. At first, Then one man crossed a line. You planning to bring that Mexican girl into your house permanently? Silence followed. The question carried more than curiosity. It carried prejudice. Elias's jaw tightened. The rancher smirked. You know folks are talking. Elias stepped closer. Not threatening, not angry, simply firm. I don't much care what folks are talking about. The rancher's smile disappeared. The conversation ended shortly afterward. But the damage remained. That evening, Elias returned home troubled. Not because of the gossip, because part of him feared there might be truth hidden inside it. He cared about Rosa, more than he should, more than he wanted. And that realization terrified him. After all these years, after all this grief, after everything he had lost, was he truly allowing himself to feel something again? The thought felt dangerous, disloyal, almost unforgivable. Late one evening, he rode to the cemetery valley. The sun was setting. Orange light filtered through the cottonwoods. He sat beside Sarah's grave, the same way he always did, the same way he had for years. And for the first time, guilt entered the ritual, because another face now occupied his thoughts. Another voice, another presence. The realization left him unsettled. Meanwhile, Rosa fought a different battle. Trust, dependence, hope. All the things she had spent years avoiding. She knew what happened when people became necessary. People left. People died. People betrayed. Depending on someone meant giving fate another opportunity to wound you. Yet despite every warning inside her heart, she found herself looking for Elias whenever he disappeared from sight. And that frightened her. One evening near the river, everything finally reached a breaking point. The sky glowed crimson above the western horizon. The water reflected streaks of gold and fire. A cool wind moved across the surface. Rosa stood beside her horse watching the sunset. Elias approached quietly. For several moments, neither spoke. The silence carried meaning now, the kind that existed between two people who understood more than they admitted. Finally, Rosa turned toward him. You ever get tired of fighting yourself? The question surprised him. A faint smile touched his face. Every day. She laughed softly. Then her expression became serious again. I don't know how to do this. Do what? This. She gestured between them. The honesty in her voice struck him harder than any confession. For a long moment, Elias simply looked at her. The fading sunlight illuminated her face. The strength, the vulnerability, the courage it had taken to speak those words. And suddenly he understood something. Neither of them feared love. They feared loss. Slowly, he stepped closer. Not enough to touch, just enough to be heard above the wind. You don't have to figure it out alone. The words were barely more than a whisper, yet they changed everything. Rosa felt tears threatened for the first time in years, not because she was weak, but kindness had become unfamiliar. For one perfect moment, the world seemed to stand still. The river flowed quietly. The sunset burned across the horizon. The distance between them disappeared. And then, a gunshot echoed from the hills. Both turned instantly. A ranch hand came galloping across the pasture. His horse was lathered with sweat. Fear filled his face. Elias! The rider barely managed to stop. Several more horses appeared behind him. Men from the ranch, all looking alarmed. What happened? Elias demanded. The ranch hand pointed toward the southern ridge. There are riders coming. Silence fell. The wind carried dust across the prairie. Far away, dark figures moved along the horizon. Armed men, several of them, heading directly toward Mercer Ranch. Rosa's blood turned cold, because she already knew. Nobody else needed to tell her. Nobody else needed to guess. Her past had finally found her.
The sun slipped below the horizon. Darkness began swallowing the land. And somewhere beyond the dying light, danger rode steadily closer.
The truth beneath the blood. Some truths arrive like thunder. Others arrive like a bullet. You do not see either until it is already too late. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel and tap the bell icon. Stories like this deserve to be remembered. The riders appeared as dark silhouettes against the fading horizon. 6 men, armed, moving steadily across the prairie toward Mercer Ranch. The last light of day painted the landscape in deep shades of crimson and gold. Dust followed behind the horses like smoke from an approaching fire. No one spoke. No one needed to. Every person standing near the ranch house understood danger when they saw it. Rosa's face had gone pale. The sight of those riders awakened memories she had spent years trying to bury. Long roads, false names, sleepless nights, the constant fear of being found. Elias looked at her, and for the first time she did not look away. The truth could no longer remain hidden. "They're here for me," she said quietly. The words fell into the evening silence. Several ranch hands exchanged uneasy glances. Samuel Briggs rested a hand on his rifle. Elias never took his eyes off Rosa. "Then tell me everything." The wind moved through the grass. The sun slipped lower. And beneath a sky filled with fire, Rosa Alvarez finally told the story she had carried for nearly a decade. That night, everyone gathered inside the ranch house. Lanterns illuminated the room with soft golden light. Outside, armed men stood watch around the property. Inside, Rosa sat at the kitchen table. Her hands rested on weathered wood. For several moments, she struggled to begin. Then she spoke. "My father owned land south of the Rio Verde." Her voice was steady, but her eyes carried years of pain. It wasn't much compared to the big cattle empires. She paused, but the grazing land was valuable. Elias listened carefully. The room remained silent. Years ago, wealthy cattle interests had begun expanding across the territory. Small ranchers found themselves squeezed from every direction. Water rights, land rights, political influence, money often spoke louder than justice. "My father refused to sell," Rosa continued. "He believed land belonged to the people who worked it." A sad smile touched her face. He was stubborn. The smile vanished. That made him dangerous. The room grew quieter. Outside, the wind rattled against the windows. Then came the part she had never fully told anyone. The men who wanted his land couldn't buy him. Her voice hardened. So they decided to remove him. Nobody interrupted. Nobody moved. They forged accusations. She stared at the lantern flame. Claimed he was stealing cattle. Samuel Briggs muttered a curse beneath his breath. Everyone knew how such accusations often ended on the frontier, especially when powerful men controlled the narrative. There wasn't any evidence. Rosa's eyes glistened. Didn't matter. The words carried decades of injustice. They gathered a mob. A painful silence followed. My father never saw a courtroom. The memory tightened around her throat. He died hanging from a cottonwood tree, while the men responsible watched. No one spoke. Even the fire seemed quieter. The room felt heavy with grief. Elias lowered his gaze, because he understood exactly what it meant to lose family through another person's greed. Rosa reached into a worn leather satchel resting beside her chair. Carefully, slowly, she removed several folded papers. The documents looked old, protected, preserved, as though they represented something precious. Because they did. My father knew they were coming. Everyone looked at the papers. He gathered evidence before he died. Elias leaned forward. "What kind of evidence?" Rosa unfolded the first document. Property records, land transfers, official signatures, then another, financial transactions, then another, witness statements. A pattern slowly emerged. A pattern of theft disguised as law. A pattern of corruption stretching across years. And one name appeared again and again. Samuel Crow. The room became still. Every ranch hand recognized the name. Everyone in the territory did. Samuel Crow was one of the most influential businessmen in the region. A respected cattle baron. A philanthropist. A political supporter. A man whose reputation seemed untouchable. Or so people believed. These documents connect him to dozens of illegal land seizures, Rosa said. Her voice remained calm, but determination burned beneath every word. He built his empire on stolen property. Elias studied the papers. The evidence appeared convincing.
dangerously convincing, enough to destroy powerful men, enough to explain why Rosa had
spent years being hunted. The room remained silent until Samuel Briggs spoke. "You saying Crow sent those riders?" Rosa nodded. "He always sends someone." The statement chilled everyone present, not because it sounded dramatic, because it sounded experienced, like someone who had spent years looking over her shoulder. Then something unexpected happened. Elias noticed a date, one particular date among the documents, a date he knew, a date burned permanently into his memory. His expression changed instantly. The room noticed. "What is it?" Rosa asked. Elias stared at the paper, then another, then another. His face grew pale. "No." The word barely escaped his lips. Rosa frowned. "What?" Elias stood slowly. The room seemed smaller suddenly. The air felt heavier. Years of memories crashed through his mind. The attack, the fire, the gunshots, the day he lost Sarah and Emily. He looked at one of the records, a transportation contract, signed by a subsidiary company controlled by Crow, the same company involved in supplying armed contractors during a violent land conflict years earlier, a conflict that escalated into bloodshed, the conflict that had destroyed his family. For several seconds, Elias could not speak. The realization struck like a hammer. "My God." The room waited. Elias looked toward Rosa. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Crow was involved." Nobody moved. The lantern flame flickered. "What do you mean?" Rosa asked. Elias swallowed hard. "The men responsible for the conflict where my wife and daughter died," his jaw tightened. "They were financed through one of Crow's operations." Silence. Absolute silence. The realization settled over everyone. Not coincidence. Not separate tragedies. Connected. The same corruption. The same greed. The same man. Two lives shattered by a common source. Rosa stared at him, unable to speak. Years of running. Years of grief. Years of unanswered questions. And now the truth stood before them. Ugly. Simple. Terrifying. Samuel Crow. The name seemed larger than ever. Not merely a businessman. Not merely a criminal. A man whose influence had poisoned entire communities. Whose ambition had left widows, orphans, graves. Outside, darkness settled across the prairie. The stars emerged one by one. The ranch house remained quiet. Everyone understood what this revelation meant. The fight was no longer about protecting Rosa. It was no longer about avenging old wounds. The stakes had become something greater. Justice, truth, accountability, for every family destroyed, for every voice silenced, for every grave left behind. Much later, after the others had gone to sleep, Rosa stood alone outside. The night air felt cold against her skin. Above her, countless stars filled the sky. Elias joined her. Neither spoke at first. The ranch lay quiet behind them, the future uncertain ahead. Finally, Rosa broke the silence. "We can still leave." Elias looked toward the distant horizon. The darkness seemed endless. "No." His answer came without hesitation. She turned toward him. He met her gaze. For the first time since they met, neither was running from the truth. Neither was hiding. Neither was afraid of what needed to be done. They've spent years taking from people who couldn't fight back. The wind moved softly through the grass. Elias's voice remained calm, but determination burned beneath it. "I'm tired of marrying good people." Rosa felt emotion rise inside her chest. Not fear, not grief. Something stronger. Hope. Dangerous hope. The kind capable of changing lives. Together they stood beneath the stars. Two wounded souls connected by tragedy, bound by truth, and united by purpose. Far away, a coyote called into the darkness. The prairie answered with silence. Above them, the constellations shone over the sleeping frontier, and somewhere beyond the horizon, Samuel Crow continued living as though his secrets would remain buried forever. He did not yet know that two survivors had finally stopped running. The wind carried across the grasslands. The stars watched from above, and for the first time in many years, Rosa and Elias faced the future not as victims of the past,
but as people prepared to fight back.
Fire over Red Creek. The first flames appeared on the horizon just before dawn. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel and tap the bell icon. Stories like this deserve to be remembered. At first, people thought it was sunlight, a distant glow rising beyond the hills. Then came the smoke. Thick, black, unnatural. By the time riders reached Red Creek with the news, everyone understood what had happened. One of the smaller ranches east of town had been burned to the ground. Livestock stolen, workers beaten, buildings reduced to smoldering ruins. No witnesses were willing to speak openly. No one needed to. The message was obvious. Samuel Crow had begun his war. Autumn settled heavily across the frontier. Cold winds swept through valleys and dry riverbeds. Clouds gathered over distant mountains. The season seemed determined to mirror the growing darkness spreading across the territory. Within days, the attacks continued. Fences were cut, water supplies poisoned, cattle vanished during the night. Men loyal to Crow appeared everywhere, sometimes openly, sometimes hidden behind masks and false names. Fear spread faster than wildfire. Families locked their doors earlier, storekeepers kept rifles behind counters. Even lawmen seemed uncertain where their loyalties belonged, because Crow's influence reached deep, into businesses, into politics, into friendships. The territory slowly divided itself. Some stood with justice, others stood with power. Mercer Ranch found itself at the center of the storm. One afternoon, Elias rode through a neighboring property and discovered a horrifying sight. 3 ranch hands had been tied to fence posts and beaten. Their injuries were severe, their message simple: leave Crow alone, or suffer worse. The brutality ignited something dangerous inside him. For years, he had buried his anger beneath routine and grief. Now it returned, stronger, hotter, more difficult to control. Each new attack brought fresh memories. The fire that had taken Sarah, the gunshots, the screams, the helplessness. Some nights he barely slept. Other nights he stared into darkness imagining revenge. Not justice, revenge. The distinction mattered, and deep inside he knew it. Meanwhile, Rosa refused to become a passive spectator in a fight involving her own past. If Crow expected her to hide behind ranch walls while others risked everything, he had misunderstood her completely. Every morning she organized documents, every afternoon she met with witnesses, every evening she traveled alongside trusted ranch hands gathering testimony from families harmed by Crow's operations. The work was dangerous. Many people were terrified. Some refused to talk. Others broke down while recounting stories of stolen land, intimidation, and violence. The deeper Rosa dug, the uglier the truth became. She discovered patterns stretching back nearly 20 years, entire communities damaged, families displaced, lives ruined, and always the same shadow lingering behind the suffering: Samuel Crow. Her determination inspired others. Soon former ranchers, merchants, and laborers began stepping forward. People who had remained silent for years found courage in her example. The movement grew slowly, but it grew. One evening, after a long day collecting statements from families near an abandoned mining settlement, Rosa returned exhausted. The sky was darkening. Storm clouds rolled across the horizon. Thunder echoed among distant mountains. She found Elias standing alone beside the corral, watching the approaching weather. Neither spoke immediately. The wind pulled at their coats. Finally, Rosa stepped beside him. "You're thinking about killing him." The statement landed quietly. Elias remained silent, which was answer enough. For a long moment they stared at the gathering storm. Then he spoke. Every day. His honesty surprised even himself. Rosa nodded. She understood, more than anyone. The temptation of revenge was easy to understand. Justice moved slowly. Pain demanded speed. Yet she also knew revenge rarely healed anything. "It won't bring them back," she said softly. Elias looked away, because she was right. That truth hurt more than any wound. Thunder rolled again, closer this time. Darkness spread across the prairie. And somewhere beyond the storm, Samuel Crow was preparing his final move. The attack came 3 nights later. The weather arrived first. A violent autumn storm swept across the frontier. Rain lashed the plains, wind howled through the cottonwoods, lightning split the sky into brilliant flashes of white. The ranch hands remained alert. Everyone expected trouble. Nobody expected how quickly it would arrive. Just after midnight, a gunshot shattered the darkness, then another, then several more. Chaos erupted instantly. Men shouted, horses screamed, dogs barked wildly. Elias was already moving before the second shot echoed across the ranch. He grabbed
his rifle and rushed outside. The storm transformed the landscape into a nightmare of rain and shadow. Figures moved between buildings. Muzzle flashes illuminated faces for brief, terrifying moments. Crow's men had come, and they had come in force. Gunfire erupted across the property. Bullets struck wood, windows exploded, lanterns crashed. The night became a blur of violence and confusion. Rosa ran toward the main office building, not away from danger, toward it. Inside that office sat the evidence, the documents, the witness statements, everything needed to expose Crow. If the papers burned, years of truth would disappear with them. Rain soaked her clothing as she sprinted through the storm. Lightning illuminated the ranch yard. A masked rider spotted her, a rifle lifted. A shot rang out, wood splintered inches from her shoulder. Still, she kept running. Inside the office, papers scattered across desks as wind blasted through broken windows. Another bullet shattered glass nearby. Rosa gathered documents desperately, stacks of evidence, property records, witness accounts, proof. Outside, the battle intensified. Elias fought like a man defending more than land. He fought for memory, for justice, for every grave that had brought him to this moment. Then he saw someone riding away from the ranch, a familiar figure, even through rain and darkness, Samuel Crow. The cattle baron had come personally, confident, certain of victory. Elias mounted his horse immediately. The pursuit carried them across open prairie beneath a sky exploding with lightning. Rain hammered the earth, mud sprayed beneath pounding hooves. The chase ended near a rocky canyon overlooking the river. Crow's horse stumbled. The older man dismounted, revolver drawn. Elias approached slowly, rifle in hand. The storm roared around them. For several moments, neither spoke. Years of suffering stood between them. Then Crow laughed, not because anything was amusing, because powerful men often mistook themselves for untouchable. "You think killing me changes anything?" Crow shouted above the wind. Elias raised his rifle. The distance between them seemed impossibly small. One pull of the trigger, one moment, one decision. The faces appeared in his memory. Sarah, Emily, the countless victims, the years of grief, the years of loss. His finger tightened. The temptation was overwhelming. Crow deserved death, perhaps more than anyone. Yet, as lightning illuminated the canyon, another realization emerged. Killing Crow would satisfy anger, but it would bury truth. A dead man could not stand trial. A dead man could not face public judgment. A dead man could become a martyr. Justice required something harder than revenge. Mercy, discipline, restraint. Slowly, Elias lowered the rifle. Crow's expression changed. For the first time that night, fear appeared. Real fear. Not fear of death, fear of consequences. Elias stepped forward. Rain streamed down his face. "You don't get to escape what you've done." Moments later, deputies loyal to the territorial marshal arrived. Crow was arrested, alive, humiliated, exposed. The storm gradually moved east before dawn. The gunfire ended, the violence faded, and as first light broke across the frontier, Rosa stood beside the river, holding a satchel filled with documents saved from destruction. Mist rose from the water, the storm clouds drifted away. Behind her, Mercer Ranch still stood, damaged, scarred, but standing. The wind moved gently across the riverbank. The fight was not over. Trials still awaited. Truth still needed to be spoken. But for the first time, victory felt possible. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the sun slowly rose over a wounded frontier, preparing to witness justice.
What shocked the entire region? The headline traveled faster than a cattle stampede. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel and tap the bell icon. Stories like this deserve to be remembered. 3 weeks after Samuel Crow's arrest, newspapers began arriving in towns scattered across the frontier. From dusty settlements near the desert to distant mountain communities, people unfolded fresh pages and stared at the same shocking story. A respected cattle baron exposed. Land theft, corruption, violence, murder. Witnesses stepped forward one after another. Families who had spent years living in fear finally found their voices. Old ranchers testified, former employees confessed, property records surfaced, financial ledgers revealed hidden transactions. The truth spread relentlessly, like sunlight entering a room that had remained dark for far too long. The territorial courthouse became crowded for weeks. Farmers traveled for days to attend hearings. Journalists filled notebooks with testimony. Lawmen escorted witnesses beneath armed guard. Every revelation seemed worse than the one before. Stories emerged of families driven from their homes, communities destroyed by intimidation, men falsely accused, women threatened into silence. Entire pieces of frontier history suddenly made sense. People who had once admired Samuel Crow now struggled to reconcile the image they knew with the reality standing before them.
By winter, the verdict arrived. Crow was convicted on multiple charges. His empire began collapsing almost immediately. Properties were seized, partnerships dissolved, political allies vanished. The powerful man who once controlled much of the territory found himself alone. Justice had not arrived quickly, but it had arrived, and Red Creek became something unexpected, a symbol. Newspapers across the frontier wrote about ordinary people who had challenged corruption and survived. People spoke of Rosa Alvarez, people spoke of Elias Mercer. But the event that truly shocked the entire region happened months later, because nobody expected it, not even those closest to him. Spring arrived gently that year. Wildflowers appeared across the valleys. The river ran stronger after winter snowmelt. The land seemed determined to heal. And for the first time in many years, Elias Mercer began changing. At first, the changes were small, almost invisible. He smiled more often, spoke more frequently, spent less time alone. The ranch hands noticed, the townspeople noticed, most importantly, Rosa noticed. Yet one ritual remained. Every morning, every noon, every sunset, Elias continued visiting the cemetery valley. The same journey, the same routine, the same grief. Or so everyone assumed. Then one morning, the visit stopped, completely. The entire county seemed to hear about it within days. People were stunned. For years, those rides had become part of Elias's identity. Many believed they would continue until the day he died. Instead, something remarkable happened. Rather than spending his days mourning the dead, Elias chose to honor them. Construction began near the edge of Red Creek. At first, nobody understood what he was building. Workers arrived, timber arrived, stone arrived. Week after week, the structure slowly rose from the earth. Then the truth became clear. It was a school, and beside it, a community center. Simple, beautiful, purposeful. The building was dedicated to Sarah Mercer, Emily Mercer, and every innocent victim lost to frontier violence. People traveled from neighboring counties to see it. Many could hardly believe the transformation. The man who had once hidden from the world behind grief was now helping rebuild it. Children filled classrooms, families gathered inside the community hall, public meetings replaced old divisions. The project became more than a memorial. It became a future. One afternoon, as sunlight poured through newly installed windows, a reporter asked Elias why he had done it. The rancher considered the question carefully, then answered, "Because grief is meant to teach us how valuable life is." The words appeared in newspapers throughout the territory. Many readers clipped the article and saved it. Meanwhile, Rosa faced a choice of her own. For years, she had survived by moving, never staying, never settling, never trusting permanence. The road had become her protection, her prison. Now, for the first time since her father's death, she possessed something she had not expected to find. A home. Not a place, a feeling. The realization frightened her, yet she embraced it anyway. One evening, she stood beside Elias overlooking the ranch. The sky glowed gold beyond the distant hills. Spring grass moved gently beneath the wind. "You're staying," Elias said quietly. It wasn't a question. Rosa smiled, a genuine smile, the kind that reached her eyes. "Looks that way." Neither made
grand promises. Neither spoke of forever. Life had taught them better. Love was not certainty. Love was choice. A choice renewed every day. And both of them understood the value of that. Months later, during the final days of summer, Elias saddled 2 horses before dawn. The air felt cool. The world remained quiet. Rosa joined him without asking where they were going. She already knew. Together they rode west, across familiar hills, through golden grass, toward the hidden valley where cottonwoods stood beside the creek. The cemetery looked much the same, peaceful, timeless. The morning sunlight filtered through leaves overhead. Birds sang softly among the branches. Elias approached the 2 graves carrying fresh flowers, not because he was trapped in mourning, because love deserved remembrance. Rosa remained respectfully behind, for a moment. Then Elias turned toward her. His expression carried both sadness and peace, the kind earned only through years of healing. He extended his hand. Rosa took it. Together they stood before the graves. Elias looked down at the names carved into stone, then spoke softly. His voice carried through the valley. "Sarah." A gentle breeze moved through the cottonwoods. "This is Rosa." He smiled faintly, not the smile of a man forgetting, the smile of a man learning to live again. I wanted you to meet her. Rosa felt emotion rise in her chest. Not jealousy, not insecurity, only respect, because she understood something important. Love was not a replacement. The heart did not erase one story to write another. It simply grew. For several minutes they remained there together. Then they turned and walked back toward their horses, the valley behind them, the future ahead. As afternoon faded into evening, they rode across open prairie beneath a vast frontier sky. The sun descended slowly. Golden light stretched across the land. Mountains glowed along the horizon. The wind carried the scent of grass and distant rivers. Neither rider hurried. There was no need. The road ahead belonged to them now. Their scars remained. Their memories remained. Their losses remained. But those things no longer ruled their lives. And as the sun disappeared beyond the western horizon, two riders crossed the golden frontiers side by side, not as people escaping the past, but as people finally free to move beyond it. That was my story. If it reached you, tell me what you felt. Don't let silence bury us again. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and tell me where in the world you're listening from.